thoughts. I give my great regards to all elders, to all the scholars who've joined us. And I hope to contribute in my part a little bit in this very early morning out here in Seattle. So thank you again. Before I start, I would just like to give a brief introduction about architecture. We really experience architecture in every aspect of our lives. We live in homes, we go to workplaces, we go to schools to learn and study, and we roam around in cities that are built and designed. And the real importance of understanding aesthetics in architecture is the fact that we want these spaces within which we live, work, play, to really elevate us as individuals, as units of family, as society in general. So the larger goal behind the study that I did a couple of years ago was, how do we create spaces that are not just functional, that are not just functioning well, that not just look well, but spaces that can elevate us from our common day lives to an aspirational way of living, an aspirational way of working, an aspirational way of really connecting with what is larger out there, what we can call the sublime. So I hope this gives a good context to the study, which the study was done in the ages of my time as a student at SEPT University. So I thank my teachers and my guide to really shepherd me into this area, and also a lot of help from my own family, which is deeply embedded in this pursuit of aesthetics and theories in the Indian knowledge system. I'll also request anyone to please unmute themselves, ask any questions at any point of time during the presentation. I really hope this is more informal than me just speaking. So please feel free to talk as I go along. I am going to share my screen. Give me one moment. So I was hoping to talk about the art of architecture today and frame it around three major questions. What is aesthetics? What is the aesthetic experience in art? And what is temporal rhythm? The second is, if architecture is an art, then what is the aesthetic experience of architecture? And the third, how does it manifest itself in Indian temples? And how do Indian temples and its architecture evoke the sublime? So just before I start on this, the first question, I'd like to step back and ask you all to imagine your first few experiences of going to a temple in wherever you're living in. So I will recall mine, and if it resonates with you, please recall that experience with your experience as well. So I remember going almost yearly to Somnath Temple in Gujarat, and earlier when I would visit, there would be dusty roads going from fields to dusty roads with a little bit of a settlement around. What you could very clearly see was the Viman of this temple at a distance. So it marked its presence on the ground. And there was a curiosity that everyone had to go towards it. As one walked towards the gates of the temple, the pace that we had as people who wanted to visit the temple would increase. And then as you visited the gate of the temple, you climbed a few steps, and then you had to pause. You admired the beauty of that, of the sculptures on the gate, of the chiseled stone that you could see, would have carved every piece of the stone outside and created this beautiful form. And automatically your body has slowed down. You have taken a pause. And then as soon as you enter this gate, you've seen this beautiful temple in front of you, this majestic structure that looks like a mountain in the middle or at the end of an ocean. And as you admire the Indian Ocean on the left and the temple right in front of you, you take a few more steps, notice that you have slowed down. And as you enter the actual temple itself, there are a few steps that lead you up to it. As you're entering the temple and the temple hall, the sound, the acoustics of the interior hall is such that everything is heightened. Your sense, your awareness of your sound that you're making as you're walking is heightened. As you talk to each other, that sound is heightened. And so automatically you hush down. You have become or come into a space that is increasing those senses. So your awareness of yourself has increased. From the hustle bustle that you left behind, now you are more acutely aware of yourself, your surroundings, and the space that you're in. As you walk a few steps further, you look at this beautiful gopura from the inside and admire again the beauty of the stone structure there. But how interesting is that when you were outside, you admired the sculptures, but when you're inside, your sight, the sound, everything is now drawing you towards the Garbhagriha. And you see this beautiful Garbhagriha, the idol inside it, within that interior chamber of the Garbhagriha. And then the only thing that you know to do is to walk towards the Garbhagriha, further in silence, and just pay your obeisance there. As you pay your obeisance and come out, the experience translates in reverse. So from this quiet chamber, now you're going to a more noisier area, to a more noisier area, to outside, where there is the noise of the sea, of people, of birds. And so now you've come from the outside life, the outer experience of the world. You went to the inner experience of the world, of the temple. You had that connection with the sublime, or with the spiritual experience that you had in the Garbhagriha, and then were able to come outside again. And as you come outside into this, into the very edge of the ocean, and you can see this connection between the temple, the ocean, you have what you would say is an aesthetic experience. And I would argue that all of us have experienced this in our lives. Those series of moments that have taken you out of your misery or your worries of day-to-day life, of thinking about work or thinking about people, and it has connected to the sublime. And so this is what we will delve into further. It is really our goal as architects, as urban designers and planners, to create these spaces that will transport us out of what we can call mundane, and create spaces that are spaces of excellence, or spaces that can lead to these connections. So in this section, I wanted to go over what theorists in the West have talked about aesthetics. And because our medium of speech right now is English, we're going to talk about aesthetics, and later on we'll talk about what does Indian aesthetic theories mean. So aesthesis in its Greek roots is called sensation and perception. There was a person called Alexander Baumgarten who really coined this word aesthetics, and he called it the study of beauty and taste in philosophy. Um, a lot of Western aesthetic theories are talking about beauty as aesthetics. And what do they mean by beauty? So Plato and John Ruskin say that beauty is morality. If you're moral, then it's beautiful. Aristotle says beauty is good. If you're a good person, you're beautiful. If you talk to Kant or Jeremy Bentham, they say if you're useful to society, if you're useful to others, then you're beautiful. So these are very utilitarian views of looking at aesthetics of beauty, and very religious and moral views as well, right? How about aesthetic theories in India? Now, very interestingly, none of our ancient aesthetic treatises have been on beauty or saundarya for its own sake. There has been Saundarya Shastra that was written much later when there was a connection with Western literature. But for us, it was the question was not about just the pursuit of knowledge, but the pursuit of true freedom. So I will just read out this quotation from M. Hiriyanna, who said the ultimate goal of philosophic quest in the Indian knowledge tradition was not knowledge or tattva gyan, it was the achievement of true freedom or moksha. So Indian philosophy was more than a way of thought, it was a way of life. And there have been many treatises on aesthetics that have been written. So there is Siddhant, Alankar, Vakrukti, Riti, Auchitya, Dhwani, all these different theories on aesthetics. Kapil Kapoor, who's a very renowned scholar on Indian knowledge system, he says that how can a cultural community that holds the object of perception, the appearance of things, the abhash matra, as the only ephemeral part, how can that culture create an aesthetic theory that is developing a science of perceptible form? So what he's saying is that because we understand, we have that ingrained understanding that as beings, as things are just in their ephemeral form, how and why would we want to create or regard that as beautiful and create a theory of beauty around that? And so our theory of aesthetics is not about the external form or the external aesthetics of objects or of people, but it is of something that is larger. And what is that? So let's talk about just the rest Siddhant, which some people would know as rest theory, written by Bharatmuni in Natya Shastra. So Natya Shastra was a treatise on obviously it was about the performing arts, but this Ras Siddhant can very well apply to any of the art forms that we experience. So whether that's dance, whether that's music, any kind of painting, architecture, any experience that you have can be connected to Ras Siddhant. And actually, it is a very sort of a simple Siddhant to understand, which can be summarized in this just one statement. Tatra vibhav anubhav vibhichari sayungat ras nischati. So a combination of different kinds of feelings, ephemeral feelings, reactionary feelings, feelings that are emerged or that emerge out of an experience of a certain event, all of that, when it combines together, when the sanyog of all of these different feelings, or what we can call different kinds of bhav, come together, the larger sort of ras that is produced, the real juice of that experience can be called as ras. So when we experience a dance performance, there are various moments where the dancer may be happy or maybe sad, angry. But what is the larger ras of that dance performance? That would be um, the dominant ras, the dominant ras of that entire piece, of that art piece. And so there are 8 sthai bhav, or what we can call experiences that can be divided into rati, hasya, karuna, rudra, veer, bhayanak, vibhit, and adbhut. And then the shant ras was added at the end. So what is the really unique part about ras theory is that even though it is talking about what is the dominant aspect of this presentation, any kind of art, the final goal of that art form is really still Anand, that one is still able to relish and have that feeling of bliss and sublimity when one is transported into those different ras and bhav and the fleeting feelings that one has. And the different parts of the experience that can be combined into the greater feeling will lead to that form of Anand. So Sri Aurobindo also writes about this in the Future Poetry and Letters on Poetry. And even though this is speaking to poetry, it is applicable to all art forms. So he says that aesthetics is concerned with beauty, but more generally to ras, the state of mind, the vital feeling and the sense to a certain taste in things. And I don't need to talk about the vital with this group. I'm sure that your experience and your understanding of the vital is better than mine own, but it is this what art and an aesthetic experience can do is to really hone in the vital that one has. And when one does that, one is able to increase further our own sort of control over our own senses, and also lead us with the other aspects of being to the supramental that Sri Aurobindo talks to. So Aurobindo also talks about universal Anand. So he says that the universal Anand is the parent of aesthesis, and it takes 3 major forms: beauty, love, and delight. And we can really look at the aesthetic theory of the Indian knowledge system through this lens, that beauty, love, and delight, everything that is encompassing in an aesthetic experience, is actually born out of that feeling of Anand. So that, because that is the progenesis of aesthetics, that when one is coming from the feeling of universal Anand, and it is embedded in art, that also becomes an outlet. And when one experiences beauty, love, and delight in art, one is partaking in that feeling of universal Anand. So we talked about Western philosophers and scholars on aesthetics, but I would like to point out 2 people. John Dewey in 1934 wrote Art as Experience. And I think he is one of the only philosophers, interestingly also had a connection with Vivekanand when he traveled to the US, that he's one of the only philosophers who speaks to aesthetic experience and art as Indians would. So he says that the distinguishing feature of aesthetic experience is that there is no distinction of self and object, because it is aesthetic in the degree in which the organism and environment cooperate to institute an experience in which the two are so fully integrated that each disappears. So, what is interesting about this is that it comes back to what we were talking about earlier when we were going through the temple, when we had talked about visiting that Garbhagriha and had that entire connection to the temple, to the outside environment. We had become one with that environment. And that created an experience in which was greater than just us as an organism or the environment as it is. It created an integrated aesthetic experience. And very simply, I think Longinus explains this in the Sublime. He talks about literature here. He's talking about literary study, but he says, a lofty passage does not convince the reason of the reader, but takes him out of himself. So what he's saying is that if one has read really good literature, one doesn't need to just engage the mental faculty. It will take you out of your own self. The sublime, acting with an imperious and irresistible force, sways every reader, whether he will or no, in a consummate excellence and distinction of language. The effect of genius is not to persuade the audience, but to transport them out of themselves. And I think everyone, all of us have experienced this, so I don't need to go further into it. But we have watched perhaps movies or had any encounter with art that has taken us out of our own, what Longinus says, transported us out of ourselves, and had a really integral, connected, consummate relationship with the art itself that we are seeing, observing, or we are a part of. And so where does temporal rhythm come in here? It's a very specific aspect of experience that we're talking about. The title of the lecture is called Temporal Rhythm and Aesthetic Experience of Architecture. So here we talk about temporal rhythm. And again, I would like to go back to literature. So when great writers write, there is no way for us to not experience the realities that they create. So Joseph B. Priestley is an English playwright who talked about Charles Dickens and Dostoevsky. And he is interestingly saying that they are such masterful writers that they can give their time impatient jerks, suddenly slow it up. By being so masterful with their times, they play on our nerves, compel us to feel excitement, often strange forebodings. They are impatient, ruthless masters of time, imposing upon us unfamiliar temporal rhythms. As we surrender to them, it is as if we had a heightened temperature. How interesting, because if we have read books, we know that we might have spent an hour in real time and probably like years in the time span of what the book is writing about. And there is that experience does also play upon our own self. Our own sensory organs react to that experience. So time is also a very important aspect of experience. Even in something that is as static as a book, one can have an experience of time. There is a sense of rhythm that is created, which is the sense of movement in time in art. So again, this is shared across all art forms. And in architecture, we will see it later through some of the examples that I will share. There is that sense of rhythm that is also created in architecture, obviously as one is moving through spaces, but as one stops, as one moves quickly, a lot of that happens without us understanding how the environment is dictating us to do so. So we may think that we are moving normally in the same pace, but a lot of the times it's the environment, it's the architecture that is allowing us to do that. And so very briefly, I'm not going to go into the details of the experience of time or the theories of time that I have, but just two main things that the experience of time can be described as. That time can be classified, or the experience of time can be classified into the perception of succession. So past, present, future, and the perception of duration, which is the sense of how long has it been in this present time. Now, why is this important? Because a lot of the times, artists, sculptors, architects are playing with this perception of succession and duration. They are setting up a sense of expectation, right? So as one goes through our experience of past, one has one is setting up an expectation of the future, and in that play of what is going to come and what has already happened and experiencing the present, there is a sense of how one is moving through time and what is your experience as you move through time. So we will see this in some of the experiences that I'm going to share right now. I'm going to stop here for just 2 minutes and find out if anyone has any questions on this a little dense part of the presentation.
I think you continue. Sorry, Beluji, please.
No, not a question, but more as a comment. I think what you were describing, Ranu, I mean, it's so fascinating. What you were describing about, visiting Somnath temple or any temple. I mean, that's true that many of us can connect with that because we've had that experience. But I was also thinking about walking through an architectural or a beautifully designed space, which need not have any spiritual or religious,
sure. Yeah.
Thing at its basis, and yet one can have that experience. But unfortunately, we are also living in times where there is so much of utilitarianism that has gone into architecture. I mean, it has become less of an art and more of a utilitarian, the functional aspect. So,
Right.
I mean, I was just thinking, how do you deal with that conflict? I mean, that everything has to be evaluated from a utilitarian perspective, and also the fact that the means are limited. Not everybody can afford the services of an architect to design their living spaces in a way that can help them connect with the sublime. And
Absolutely.
yet, it's so important if that elevation part has to come in, which is what you started off with, which is the whole point of art. So, I mean, these were just some thoughts that were going on as I was listening to you. So you don't have to address them now. If you are building it up to that will be great. But I just wanted to bring that point here. So.
Yeah, no, Veluji, I think you're exactly right. I think what is different about architecture is that it's a mediated art. It is juggling between economy on a very real basis and the needs of people. So Vitruvius says that the 3 pillars of architecture is utilitas, firmitas, and venustas. So utility, strength, like the way that it can survive for a long time, and beauty. And I think it's very interesting that exactly, you're right, that it doesn't need to be grandeur in architecture. It doesn't need to have the same beauty that ancient architecture possessed in its scale, in its in the beautiful way in which the sculptures were designed, but in the creation of spaces that can lead to an aesthetic experience. And what I mean by that is that even a traditional bhungo Bhuj Kutch, the circular mud structures, which
Absolutely.
are so beautiful. Um, they are very humble in their material. They're very humble in their scale, and built by people, not even architects. But in the way that they are designed, they are functional. They keep everyone cold or at a good temperature in the summer. They are off the land. They have spaces within them that people can enjoy. And I think everyone who's experienced those traditional structures have had a really good experience. It does elevate you out of
Yeah.
out of the external environment. So um, I think the aim for everyone, architects, I think are at great can be sort of blamed for the bad design out there. But for everyone can be to create those spaces that can elevate one through the materials that one has, through the ability that one has. But one is able to do it, and through a careful thinking of how we can do it, through creation of spaces that can uh, that can create that aesthetic experience. And perhaps in the example that I will show, there will be there will be some of that. But that's a great question. That's a great comment.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So I am going to take us through a, a walking tour of one of the tombs in India, not a temple, but as an antithesis to a temple. It's a different typology. It's a different um, piece of architecture. But I think what this will show is that aesthetic experience is something that a lot of different or almost all different art forms can have. And in architecture, it's the experience of the body moving through space and time that lends to it. So as one goes through or just starts to enter a Humayun's tomb in Delhi, uh, you have the first experience of a gated entrance. And as soon as you enter, you are in a temple in this sort of vicinity of a garden. And interestingly, you're walking in a straight line, but around you there are gardens that are sort of increasing in their scale. So the first gate you have passed, there is a garden, and then as you draw closer to the next opening in a wall, there is another gateway in front of you, and a bigger garden. And as you walk further, there is this third gate that you've entered, and now you're really within this space, which is taller than you, and you're enclosed within this space. If you walk loudly, you can hear that reverberate within this gateway. And as you come out, you've had another experience of a larger garden. And lo and behold, you're at this point where there is an even bigger gate that you're going towards. And this gate, beyond this gate, you can see a glimpse of a building, which is again in front of you. And now you see this entire building with the garden, the charbagh. There is a water stream that's in front of you, so you can't really walk in a straight line. You need to go around the system of water canals. So as you're walking along, there are fountains in the middle, and you're really required to you can't walk straight through the fountain, so you're actually walking around it. As you walk around, you're losing sight of the tomb, and you're actually looking at the garden now. You're looking at the fountain, you're looking at the birds that are flying. As you've walked along the fountain and you've come close to the actual building, and the building itself has disappeared at this point of time. As you're climbing up the steps, another gateway, believe it or not, and then up into this upper podium of the tomb. And one is rotating oneself around this temple, around this tomb, and then coming inside this tomb area, where again, a masterful play of light and dark, sound and shadow. And in that interior experience that one has, as one experiences the tomb and this really interior dark space, it's very different from the temple experience that I spoke about earlier. But this entire experience of going through the various points of the gates and the gardens, and then the larger gardens, can be classified as an aesthetic experience. And even when you're going within this tomb, this is the plan of the actual tomb, you can go inside and then really have an experience around the central tombs themselves. One is able to also have an aesthetic experience. So these are some sketches of how that experience feels like. And that if you are able to create some notations of it, really understand how you moved through these spaces, how you paused through these spaces, how you moved at different levels through the space, and how your body was orienting itself as it moved across these different spaces. One understands what temporal rhythm is. So as I'll just go back really quickly, there was a rhythm that was being set up by the architects who designed this, of a gate and then freeing up from that enclosed space into a garden. And that rhythm kept increasing. It's like in music when, or in a rag, where the music starts out slow, but there is a crescendo that is reached. And that crescendo leads to a certain kind of climax. And this was this moment that is set up in Humayun's tomb. So this sort of pace of expectation that you are going to enter this gate and then a garden, another bigger gate and a garden, reaches its pinnacle at this point of time. And that's like a masterful sort of crafting of the story of Humayun's tomb right here. And it doesn't need to, we don't need to really sort of attach the experience of our own personal religious beliefs here. But as an experience of space through time, this is what would classify as an aesthetic experience. So jumping on to Indian temples again, how does temple architecture evoke the sublime? So we talked about Somnath. Let's talk about Sri Brihadiswara temple in Tamil Nadu. And what is interesting about temples is that there are multi-layered meanings attached to them. So not just the fact that temples are places of worship for a lot of us who visit them, but in the way that they have been constructed. And what I mean by that is in the way that there is a Viman or Gopuram that we see, there is a path of travel, there is the temple hall itself within the premises of the temple structure, there is a Garbhgriha within the very sort of interior part of the Viman, and the temple grounds. All of these are constructed in ways that are sort of talking about layers of consciousness. And as one is experiencing the outer layer of consciousness, one is looking at the experience of the grounds around. So when one is outside the temple, one sees There is the gate, there is the final sort of Viman at the end, and there are so many sculptures. So in Indian temples, why are there so many sculptures? If you look at Meenakshi temple, there are colorful Indian sculptures there. There are stories of Indian mythologies. There are uh, various sort of different experiences that are shown of kings and queens and ordinary people. And what we can say is that it is a depiction of material life. It is a depiction of the different experiences, the pleasures, the pain, the suffering of life, of people. These are stories that everyone can relate to. Temples are also grounds where people come together to talk about their own community, their own lives. So a lot of people, when they go to these temples and experiences large spaces, these temple grounds, they automatically want to have those conversations. Temples also become sites of events and festivals when these happen. So the way in which these spaces have been designed, the way in which the temple grounds have been designed, is to accommodate these aspects of our social life, these aspects of our physical and material lives, and actually depict it, show it in a grand way on the exterior of the temples. And there is, however, that same succession of going from outside to inside. So when one is outside, one is talking, children are playing, people are buying flowers, and as soon as there are these gateways that are leading you inside, one is more heightened to the awareness that of the purpose with which they've come here. So in the second gateway that one experiences as Sri Brihadiswara, there are sculptures of deities and gods that are welcoming you inside. Also stories about the Lord themselves in these sculptures. So now you're orienting yourself further to Sri Brihadiswara and learning more about the temple god and your purpose within it. As one enters this inner courtyard, now one can see there is this Viman, essentially this marker of the sanctum sanctorum, the place in which the inner God has been sort of situated. And it is a connection, an axial connection of the divine, or from the outer sort of environment into this very sort of constrained but very powerful garbhagriha inside. And one can experience sort of the layers of these mountains within the rock sculptures that have been created. And even though there is no embellishment in terms of painting or color or other kind of metal ornaments, the way in which the space, the building has been crafted, the way in which the length, the tallness of the Viman is constructed, one has that sort of sense that this is a prominent, a very important landmark, a very important sort of grounding of something unique, the sublime within, in that space. And what one usually does is that one sort of does a movement around the temple. So whether that happens before you go to the sanctum sanctorum or afterwards, but one is always led to sort of experience the temple, the Viman, and its surroundings. So when one does that, there is a further experience of this external outer world. You can see within the shadows that fall on the stone and the sculpture that there are the various gods that are being shown here. There are also the connection to the temple garden, You can see the experience that is being set up as you were entering in. So there was the Vaman and the various gates and the linear connection right there. You can see the various apsaras or sculptures that are showing the different sort of art forms. You can see the different scriptures that are being written on the stone itself. And then as one goes inside this temple in the Sanctum Sanctorum, towards the Sanctum Sanctorum, the light is reduced. People are quieter. As you walk, there is a heightened awareness of your environment. And as one is basically very close to the Sanctum Sanctorum, you can't see anything inside. It's completely dark. And that's the play of light and shadow. That you're still in that level of consciousness where you're still one step away and you need to step in further and have that experience with have that experience with the sublime, with your own sort of inner self. So temples in Indian architecture is about the journey from outside to inside, environmentally and physically, but also of the external outer worlds that we live in and are part of, to our internal consciousness and our internal worlds that we participate in. So it's from the hustle and bustle and from all the various sculptures outside. The inner temple is more quieter, more it's focused on the Lord and our experience of it. And whether that's Sri Brihadiswara, Somnath temple, or any other temple that even we have been to, but we have the same sort of repetition of experience, the same temporal rhythm of experience, of going from outside to inside, of experiencing the outer to inner, of having that same sort of collective experience that we will have. So, and then paying our obeisance and going out. So these are, again, some temporal notations to really understand how we can document this aesthetic experience. I know this was a long talk, but I'm really happy to share the study with you, and happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Thank you. It was really good how temporal rhythm brings, creates one experience. I think I see some chats in chat box. If I don't know whether you can read, otherwise I'll
I
read.
can. Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
you can read.
I can read them.
Right. So read it loudly and let's see.
Sure.
What is written.
Ark Samantha ji has said perception of time and space both coexist in fourth dimensional or higher dimensional consciousness. Actually, time does not exist physically, but it is generated from our consciousness and measure of flow of reality. Samantha, I really appreciate your comment here. And I did not go further into the theories of time that that are there in Indian philosophy. But you're right, Western philosophy does talk about time in very regulated in terms. So there is time is basically it talks of time as a measure of duration. So 6 minutes or 6 hours, and sort of creating that sense of finite time. But if we talk about experience of time or perception of time, we can really talk about it in terms of what we have experienced, what we are experiencing currently in the present, and what is going to come in an anticipation of that. So that's the triad of time that creates experiences, and also there is a sense of duration that comes into being. So I very much agree with your statement that time does not exist physically, but from our own consciousness and measure a flow of reality. And for some people who have that sense of limited duration, or people who have a limited understanding of time, it can lead to a sort of a very scientific way of understanding experiences. But when one talks about aesthetic experience, one needs to talk about temporal rhythm. So that's a great comment. If you'd like to please elaborate further, then please unmute yourself, and I'd be happy to talk further. I think Ravi Bhushan sir has a question. He's raised his hand. Could you please unmute yourself?
Good evening, everybody. Ranu, it's not a question. I'm extremely delighted to listen to your talk. And I'm happy that you related the concept of beauty and aesthetics through architecture. It's really this juxtaposition of art and architecture, and that too, to understand beauty and aesthetics, it's really delightful to listen to. Now, having said it, I think since you referred to the theory of Rasa, you have referred to even Longinus, and then the aesthetics and beauty, so many things. I'm reminded that Bharatmuni Natya Shastra, when he began Natya Shastra, somewhere he said, Yatho hastha tatho drishti, yatho drishti tatho manaha, yatho mana tatho bhava, yatho bhava tatho rasa. That means it's a beautiful trajectory from the movement of hands to the realization of rasa in one's. So, as you said, like during the last section of your talk, that temples are something, an interface between the outside world and the inner world of a person. Now, second thing which I wish to say is that Anand, because Anand is an important category in this whole discussion of beauty, aesthetics, and rasa. Anand is something, number one, it does not have an equivalent in any other language, particularly English language. There is no equivalent word of Anand. We may call bliss or pleasure, but I think that does not reflect the real essence of Anand. However, Anand can be of three, categories: intellectual, physical, and spiritual. Now, the whole idea of contemporary, you can say, experiences is that this physical aspect of Anand gets the dominant space, whereas this intellectual and spiritual aspect of Anand gets a backseat. Now, for people like us, I think it's a challenge, it's an opportunity to really come forward, maybe like architects, you and people like me who teach. If we can really instill this concept of intellectual and spiritual joy or Anand in our students, or in our, you can say, discussion, that would be really great, because even Aurobindo talks about that there are three sources of knowledge, that is heart, intellect, and intuitive intellect. I think a beautiful combination in terms of Anand. Last thing which I wish to say is that I think Billu Mehraji raised this point of utility and usefulness of something. Now, see, even literature had this debate, and this debate continues, this art for art's sake and art for social change. Literateurs like Munshi Premchand used to say literature is to examine life, and it is, in a country like India, we cannot afford to have literature art for art's sake. We need to have literature or art for social change. Now, that could be one point of view, maybe from one section of academicians, but I think there is a beautiful combination of these two schools of thought as far as role of literature in society is concerned. There has to be art for art's sake, as well as there has to be art for social change. I completely agree whatever you said during your talk. In fact, I'm overwhelmed listening to you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kiranji, for giving this opportunity to us.
Thank you, Raviji, for joining us, and
Thank you.
it's always a pleasure. I think
My pleasure.
Uh, anybody who wants to share their observation or comments, I welcome. Still, we have 1 or 2 minutes. Beluji, because of internet problem, she has dropped down. I felt for a while, but now I'm back. So that is very good. Our Jignesh Desai ji is saying very nice talk, Ranu. So thank you, Jignesh ji. Ranu ji, if you want to comment on that, just communicate. I'm thankful to all of you. Beluji is back. Beluji, you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, my internet is not very friendly today. And I missed some part of the conversation between Ravi Bhushan ji and Ranu ji. So I don't know what
I think some internet problem was there.
Some problem
Yeah.
on my internet. So, but anyway, like I said, it may be out of context since I missed some of the conversation. But Ranuji, there was at one point I was thinking of, you made me think of, reflect on my experience of walking through and as you were describing the walk through the Humayun's tomb, actually my mind was going to the Kalakshetra
Right.
because I have always felt generally museums, particularly in India, are designed in a very functional way, and the beauty part is missing, or the experiential part gets missed.
Right.
So I did not know this term before, the temporal rhythm that you spoke of, but I recognized today that it felt like there was a rhythm of walking through that space. So I wanted to thank you for bringing that to my vocabulary, giving a context to speak of that experience. So.
No, I want to thank everyone for their really kind words and also for giving me a space to share my experiences as an architect. And Ravi Bhushan ji, I really sort of empathize with what you said, because I think as architects, one is constantly struggling also to sort of balance art for art's sake and art for as a utilitarian function that is serving society. And our goal is really, like you said, to integrate them, and that is sort of the higher purpose for designers to be, I think. So thank you for giving the same context, and hopefully we all can have these experiences more in life and be able to share these collective experiences. So thank you.
Thank you, Ranu, and thank you all participants. Last line I would share from Sri-Aurobindo. True art depends on life. It is not just so I'm thankful that you came over here, spent time, and brought some new perspective here also. I'm thankful to all the participants who are participating, and thanks to today there are many new people have joined. Please accept my gratitude that you spare your time and came back. Thank you all of you. We'll meet again on next Wednesday with next follow. Thank you so much.